All right, let's dive into a story about a massive, century-long tug of war for the very soul of Europe. It's a clash between an old, rigid way of doing things and a flood of brand new, absolutely explosive ideas. Ideas that, honestly, were going to change the world forever.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1815. Napoleon has finally been defeated. But Europe? It's a complete and utter mess. His wars have torn the continent apart. Old maps are useless, ancient royal families have been kicked out, and those big ideas from the French Revolution, liberty, equality, they're everywhere. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. So, if you're one of the leaders of the great powers, you have a huge question on your hands. How? How do you put all this back together? How do you stop the chaos and make sure another Napoleon never ever happens again? Their answer to that question would pretty much define the next 100 years.
And their solution? Well, it was basically to try and hit the rewind button. This first part of our story is all about that conservative reaction. It was a full-on attempt to build a new order so strong, so rigid, that they thought it could never be broken.
They called this thing the Concert of Europe. And no, it wasn't a rock band. Think of it more like a club for kings. It was an agreement between the big players, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Great Britain, to work together. Their mission was simple: put the old monarchs back on their thrones and squash any revolution the second it popped up. But here's the fatal flaw, the big problem from day one. Even though they all hated revolution, they were all secretly competing with each other. This was supposed to be the immovable object at the center of our story, but it was built on really shaky ground. And the guy pulling all the strings, the chief architect of this whole system, was Austria's Clemens von Metternich. For him, ideas like liberty and nationalism weren't just bad. They were like a disease, a plague threatening everything. And his cure was pretty harsh: secret police spying on everyone, censoring books and newspapers, and using brute military force to crush any and all dissent. But here's the thing. While Metternich was busy building this fortress of order, something else was gathering steam, an unstoppable force. Two incredibly powerful ideas were spreading like wildfire across Europe, and these were ideas you just couldn't censor or lock up. And these were the two engines of that change. On one side, you had liberalism. This was driven by the rising middle class, doctors, lawyers, merchants, who were demanding a say in how they were governed. They wanted constitutions, the right to vote, freedom of speech, you know the drill. And on the other side, you had nationalism. This was the powerful, passionate belief that people who share a language and culture, like the Germans or the Italians or the Poles, should have their own independent country. Together, these two forces were a direct attack on everything Metternich was trying to build.
And yeah, it did not take long for the pressure to start building. Before we get to the big earthquake, a whole series of smaller revolts started to shake the foundations of this conservative order. You could feel the tremors spreading all across the continent. What's really fascinating here is if you look at that significance column. In Greece, the great powers, the Club of Kings, actually broke their own rules and helped the rebels. It showed their unity was a sham. In Russia, a revolt failed, but it terrified the Tsar so much he became even more of a tyrant. And in France, bam, they proved you could still kick a king off the throne. Every single one of these events was another big crack in Metternich's dam.
This timeline really shows you how things were heating up. You can just see the defiance spreading, popping up in one corner of Europe and then another. The system was holding, but you had to wonder, for how much longer? And that brings us to the main event. If the last few decades were tremors, 1848 was the earthquake. They called it the springtime of nations because it really felt like a whole new era of freedom was just blooming everywhere. The dam was about to burst. In this one single, unbelievable year, the conservative order was rocked to its very foundations. From Paris to Berlin, from Vienna to Budapest, the whole system Metternich had so carefully built just went up in flames. So what lit the fuse? Well, it was a total perfect storm. You had terrible harvests, so people were literally starving. At the exact same time, they were completely fed up with being censored and having no political voice. You combine economic desperation with political anger, that is an explosive mix. And just look at how far this spread. This wasn't one revolution. It was dozens of them, all erupting at pretty much the same time.
In France, they got rid of the king again. In the German and Italian lands, people were fighting to create their own unified nations, and the huge, multi-ethnic Austrian Empire was almost ripped to shreds by all the different nationalist groups demanding independence. The old world was right on the brink of collapse.
So with all this momentum, why did the revolutions ultimately fail? This quote gets right to the heart of it. German revolutionaries actually got together, created a parliament, and offered the crown of a united Germany to the King of Prussia. And he said no. Why? Because it came from the people, from what he called the gutter, not from God or other kings. That clash right there between the will of the people and the pride of the monarchs was a huge reason why things fell apart.
Okay, so this is the crucial takeaway. In the short term, yes, the revolutions failed. The armies of the old rulers managed to claw back power. But, and this is so important, the concert of Europe, that old boys' club of conservative kings, was dead, shattered. They didn't trust each other anymore. The immovable object had been broken for good. Now, with that old international order gone, every empire was on its own. So let's take a look at Russia, because it's a perfect case study. As the most autocratic state, meaning all the power was in the hands of one guy, the Tsar, its leaders could see the writing on the wall. They knew they had to change to survive. But this created this really bizarre and dangerous cycle.
And this was the loop they got stuck in. First, Russia would lose a war, which made it look weak and backward, so in response, the Tsar would start reforms from the top down. But then, these reforms, like freeing the serfs or building factories, would create brand new social problems, like a huge class of angry poor workers. This new tension would scare the rulers, who would then clamp down even harder, which of course, just started the whole cycle over again.
And you can see this pattern play out perfectly right here. Alexander II frees the serfs, but it doesn't really fix their problems, and he ends up getting assassinated. Then Sergei Witte pushes for industrialization, which creates a massive, unhappy working class that becomes the perfect recruiting ground for revolutionaries. Finally, Nicholas II gets forced to create a parliament, but then he takes back as much power as he can the first chance he gets. It was always one step forward, two steps back.
So when you zoom out and look at the big picture, what does it all mean? Well, that 100-year battle between order and defiance, it had a clear winner, even if it didn't always look like it at the time. The old world was fundamentally, irreversibly broken.
This really is the best way to think about it. Metternich's whole system, the Concert of Europe, was never going to last. It was just a dam, built to hold back the unstoppable flood of new ideas like liberalism and nationalism. And you can only hold back a flood for so long before the dam breaks.
And this is the legacy. That old alliance of kings was ancient history. Nationalism, even though it was crushed again and again, would eventually completely redraw the map of Europe. And most importantly, all those unresolved tensions from the 19th century, the class conflicts, the ethnic rivalries, they didn't just go away. They festered, and they would spill over with absolutely catastrophic results into the 20th century, leading directly to World War I. Which leaves us with one final, kind of chilling question to think about. This 100-year fight shattered the old conservative order, but the struggle showed us just how violent and chaotic the birth of a new world can be. It makes you ask, doesn't it? When one order breaks, what comes next?